Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Yes, it's time to talk about OLED burn-in once again. At this point, I've been aggressively burning in my 4K OLED monitor for 21 months, so it's time to take a look at how the panel is holding up. There are quite a number of these 3-monthly updates in this series, but in case you're joining us for the first time, I've been burning in my MSI MPG 321 URX QD-OLED monitor on purpose by using it exclusively for productivity work. We're talking static desktop content all day, writing scripts, browsing the web, updating spreadsheets, and more. This is the complete opposite of how I recommend people use an OLED monitor. These products are best designed for content consumption like gaming or video playback, not using productivity apps for hours on end. The setup is straightforward. Nearly 2 years ago now, I was using a 32-inch 4K IPS LCD for productivity work, and when the 321 URX was released, I swapped out the LCD for this new OLED and changed nothing else about my setup. For the past 21 months, I've been performing a real-world, worst-case OLED longevity test, which includes more than 8 hours of continuous static usage each day. At this point, I've used this OLED for about 5,000 hours, which is 8 to 10 hours of use at 200 nits of brightness every single day. The panel is reporting that 576 compensation cycles have been run, which is a normal pace that has been kept up throughout this testing. Again, the recommended rate for compensation cycles is every 4 hours, but doing this is a bit disruptive during work as the cycle makes the monitor unusable for 7 minutes. The way I'm using the monitor is fully realistic, but more intense than is recommended and more stressful on burn-in. In this update, I'm showing the 6, 12, 18, and 21 month results. Again, we're focusing on the center of the display, which is where in previous months there was visible burn-in. I've kept using the same system from last few updates to make these burn-in results viewable through YouTube compression, including adding some static noise into the image, which seems to reduce compression artifacts and makes the burn-in more visible. I'd still recommend watching this video at 4K for the highest image quality. First up are the original unenhanced examples as seen directly from the camera. These examples roughly reflect what burn-in looks like in real life, though in some situations the real-life visibility of these artifacts is worse than you'll see here. Initially, after just a few months of testing, burn-in was quite hard to spot in the unenhanced examples, but over time it's become more noticeable, especially when viewing dark to mid-dark uniform grey content. There are no major changes between 18 months and 21 months, aside from the slow continual degradation of the panel. Across all examples, the 21-month results are the worst so far, but not by a substantial amount, and in some cases the two captures 3 months apart can look very similar. This is typical with what we've found previously. Even this type of heavy productivity use doesn't rapidly degrade the screen in the span of just a few months. There's a much larger difference, however, between the 21-month and 12-month results. There are two main artifacts that are noticeable in these images: the line down the center of the display, which corresponds to the border of applications when used in a side-by-side configuration, and the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, which in my case is a dark Windows 11 taskbar. Both of these artifacts are burned in to a greater degree after 21 months compared to 12 months. When we enable the burn-in enhancement filter, these artifacts become more obvious. To be clear though, these are digitally enhanced images of the screen that deliberately exaggerate the small differences in uniformity the camera is capturing. This is not how the panel looks in real life, but it's designed to make burn-in observations easier. The line down the center of the screen is actually a combination of two artifacts. There is definitely a line that runs down the exact middle that aligns with the central border between two side-by-side apps, but the right side of the screen has also degraded more than the left and appears darker in these examples. This is because I tend to favor snapping apps to the right side over the left, so when I have one app open, it's most likely on the right and displaying brighter content, which degrades the screen faster. The border between apps is typically dark, so this is actually causing inverse burn-in. The brighter app windows have degraded the left and right sides of the monitor faster than the darker borderline down the center. Darker, lower brightness pixels degrade more slowly than brighter pixels. The other main artifact is the taskbar, which is again inverse burn-in. The brighter application windows above the taskbar area have degraded the screen faster than the darker taskbar itself. No app icons are visible, despite these icons being broadly identical and in the same position as when I first started this test. It's just a general shadow where the taskbar is located. As the app windows slowly degrade the main portion of the screen, the taskbar burn-in artifact becomes more visible. We can also use color examples to explore how the display's individual subpixels are degrading. As we found in previous months, the red subpixel has degraded the least, as I only started to spot faint burn-in around the 15-month mark. The blue subpixel is the second most affected, with more obvious levels of burn-in dating back to the 6-month mark, and then we get to the green subpixel, which is clearly the worst of the three. It's degrading the fastest and seems to be contributing the most to overall burn-in results. None of these results have changed substantially between 18 months and 21 months. Again, it's all just a gradual continuation of what we observed previously. Uneven aging of the subpixels can cause a color temperature shift over time, and that's what I noticed occurred around the 12-month mark, where the display's white point had shifted from 6450K to 6350K. Since that point, I've not observed any further shift in white point. It's still around 6350K after 21 months. There is also a theory that the burn-in compensation cycles will reduce peak brightness over time as they attempt to compensate for uneven wear and cause the entire panel to run at a lower brightness level. For the first 18 months, I spotted precisely 0 brightness change. It started at 243 nits peak and remained at 243 nits after all that time. But after 21 months, for the first time ever, I've recorded a small brightness drop. My screen now maxes out at 238 nits. That's just a 2% loss, which is not significant, but it'll be interesting to track how brightness fares in the coming months. Now that we've got a good number of samples, we can also create an accelerated time-lapse of sorts, which gives us a look at how degradation is occurring across all these months. It can often be a bit difficult to spot the burn-in across a number of side-by-side comparisons, but I think this pretty clearly shows what is happening. Over time, the line and taskbar burn-in are becoming more prominent, and the right side of the screen in particular is getting darker and becoming more degraded compared to the left. However, it also reveals that a lot of the burn-in we're seeing now was evident as early as 6 months into this testing. From 3 to 6 months, there was a noticeable increase in burn-in, and ever since then it's been slower degradation, with the same artifacts becoming slightly more noticeable each time. If there wasn't such a big jump early on, it would have been interesting to see how the panel would have looked today. Could degradation be reduced by optimizing things within those first 6 months of use? As for how these burn-in results affect day-to-day usage of this monitor, at this point the various artifacts are visible in certain scenarios. The times I'm most likely to notice are using productivity apps with uniform dark grey backgrounds like Photoshop and Premiere, as I talked about in previous updates. After 21 months, seeing these artifacts is certainly annoying, and there are edge cases where it's having an impact, but generally speaking, it hasn't been a noticeable problem in most of the tasks I use my monitor for. It's not something I'm thinking about yet on a day-to-day basis. At 5,000 hours of static app usage, we're talking about more than 8 hours of use every single day for 21 months, or 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for nearly 2.5 years. That's with 200 nits of brightness, light mode, and no other steps taken to mitigate burn-in, including a low compensation cycle frequency and leaving the monitor on for at least an hour without activity. And it's only recently where I've started to get a little annoyed at the level of burn-in, but really for most tasks, it's still fine. In a more mixed workload, where you use the display for 4 hours of static content per day, these results would be representative of around 3.5 years of daily use. And that timeline extends if you only use the monitor on some days, or if you do literally anything to help mitigate burn-in, including just using an overall lower level of brightness. As a reminder, burn-in with OLEDs is directly related to hours of usage and is cumulative, so if you only use static apps for 4 hours a day, you should expect to see double the lifespan compared to using static apps for 8 hours a day. If you're looking at this video wondering whether an OLED will be okay to purchase for your use case, there's a couple of takeaways. If you're buying an OLED to use mostly for gaming or watching videos, and by mostly I mean 70% plus of the time that's what you're doing, I wouldn't really worry about burn-in. The occasional amount of static app use here and there is not going to cause a significant amount of burn-in, and even light amounts of burn-in will be next to impossible to spot while playing games. In these scenarios, it's going to take years for burn-in to have any real-world effect. If your primary monitor use case is productivity work though, at the moment I'd say you'll likely have up to 3 years of decent usage under normal conditions before burn-in starts to be a concern. That timeline will change depending on how frequently you use the display for static content and your configuration, for example dark mode usage and so on, but about 3 years is a reasonable expectation until we see more evidence of panel longevity. Not so coincidentally, most OLEDs these days come with a 3-year burn-in warranty, which does sort of align with these results. You'll probably only start to see problematic burn-in after this warranty period has expired, which is of course typical, but not ideal for those wanting an expensive OLED to last for, say, 5 or more years. Anyway, I'll be back in 3 months from now to go through another set of burn-in results, but for now, that's it for this one. If you do appreciate our consistent testing of OLED burn-in over these years and sacrificing this MSI monitor so that all of you guys can see how productivity affects burn-in, then please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and also signing up to our Patreon page. Links to that are in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some pretty cool benefits. We've got our Discord community with a dedicated monitors channel. We've also got the ICC profiles and recommended settings for all the monitors that we test available for members, and plenty of other good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.